www.untitled.org/shop. So please help me welcome our presenter, Barbara Fountain. Barbara Fountain is a licensed professional counselor and the owner of the Lifeline of Family Enrichment Counseling in Austin, Texas. Ms. Fountain is from the St. Edward's University, receiving a Bachelor of Science in the field of psychology and the Master's in Art in Human Services in Counseling. She has over 17 years of experience serving children and families, including 8 years with the Department of State Health Services, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Program Services, 1 year with Health and Human Services, the office, and 19 years of private practice. Her motto is strengthening families to succeed. She is passionate about providing education to assist in removing the stigma associated with mental illness and seeking services, especially with the African American community. Now let's enjoy the presentation. Thank you, Barbara. We're excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Sonia, so much. Good morning, everyone. Good to see smiling faces this morning. Glad that you took time out to come and join me for today's presentation. And so we're going to begin by putting up our first slide, Mary. And so we're looking at picking up the pieces after COVID. What do I do? So here I am in the midst of a pandemic. You know, I was looking and thinking about it, and in 2020, what happened was our whole world was turned upside down, and it literally rocked our world because everything that we were familiar with all of a sudden was turned upside down. And we were clinging together for the first time, grasping on each other, looking to each other for support and guidance. Next. So that's a little bit about me, and you guys have kind of, Sonia went over that and covered that. Next. So what can we expect from this? Hopefully when you walk away from today's session, you're going to be able to have a clearer understanding about trauma and what it is, what a traumatic event is. It's built around helping individuals be able to recognize trauma in children, because children are not just little adults. They are different. The way that they react to situations are totally different than the way adults do. So this is to help give you some type of framework if you have a child, or if you're working with children. The warning signs that a child may be experiencing, or even adult may be experiencing a trauma. We're going to take a little glimpse at post-traumatic stress disorder. What are some of the symptoms for it? Who may be at a greater risk for developing post-traumatic stress disorder? Then we're going to look at how we can help your children and who can help and where you can get help from. Next. So here we are picking up the pieces. And, you know, as we entered into 2021, we were thinking, oh my goodness, finally a breather. In 2020, we were looking for answers. In 2020, we were searching for the reasons why. In 2020, we were looking for a cure. Next. And so COVID brought with it a new world for us. For the first time, the world shut down, not just a city, not just a state, not just one or two countries, but the world. And so for the first time in our lives, we found ourselves being isolated at home, you know, and in the beginning, we all had a thought, oh my goodness, wouldn't it be great to be able to work from home? Unfortunately, it wasn't in the realm of which we had considered it. But here we are working at home, and our kids are doing school at home. And then just to kind of show you why that overwhelming feeling, because I think sometimes we just look at it and think that we just experienced COVID, but not just COVID. COVID, the isolation, working at home, trying to work from home if I was a parent and help my child on the computer, do schoolwork, and there was a political crisis, and we had the George Floyd, and we had police shootings, and we had a presidential election like none other, and we had the insurrection at the Capitol. Then on top of that, we had ice storms. People were in their own homes without water, without electricity, without being able to get to food. That's overwhelming. When we look at it and thinking all of this is happening back to back to back. And so we took a breather in 2020 and we go, thank goodness, you know, if we can just find a cure and people can start getting better. And then we rolled into 2021, expecting it to be totally different. And then we get a different surprise. What do we get? We get more overwhelming news, because at least in 2020, there was a spirit of unity and everybody was working together and everybody was trying to help everyone. We were in the same ship together. And then 2021 about dissension. All of a sudden, the doctors and the nurses who had been heroes, all of a sudden they were the enemy. All of a sudden, we're seeing them called just overnight. The cure that we had prayed for, it almost had now all of a sudden came into being a terror. And then it was, do we immunize or don't we immunize? Then we've got school board meetings where parents are becoming outraged and turning against the school board and teachers and administrators, and masks being pulled off of teachers, and the chaos just grew. Next. So whether or not you know it or not, you experienced a trauma. But not only did you experience a trauma, your children experienced a trauma also. So what is trauma? Trauma has been defined as an emotional response to an event or that has either been witnessed as a bystander or experienced as a person being there firsthand. Previously, when it came down to PTSD, the bystander aspect wasn't considered, but it's equally as traumatizing. And so trauma can have a lasting effect on your mental health. If you can just imagine a fingerprint being imprinted in your brain, that's what trauma does. And so there are different types of trauma. There's bullying, there's community violence, there's complex trauma, there's disasters, there's intimate partner violence, medical trauma, and physical abuse. So I want you to think about our children and look at this list, and then you can begin to see that children have a complex trauma because they've had multiple layers of this happening. In the school area, they're dealing with bullying, but not just at school, because if you're as old as dirt as I am, and you've gone through some things, you remember everybody kind of went through the bullying aspect. But for us, it just happened at school. You kind of got bullied. You could go home, you could forget about it, but not so today. Today, because of social media, children have no escape. So they experience the bullying at school. It carries over into their social media. So they're constantly being bombarded with these messages. And so think about that in the context of what I said just shortly ago about being overwhelmed and all of those things happening. In addition, they've got the community violence that's going on in their area, the various things that are happening on the news in the community. And so then the complex trauma is layered. So here it is, the bullying, they've got it in the community. Then COVID is a disaster. Then on top of that, there have been storms, there have been tornadoes, there have been flooding. And so some of them, because of the situations that are going on at home and being quarantined at home, they were able to now be facing some domestic violence that may be going on with their parents at the same time. And then the medical trauma. Lots of kids lost parents. Lots of them lost grandparents or aunts and uncles that were close to them or best friends. And then some of them, because of those closed environments and being quarantined, even experienced physical abuse. So you can see why COVID has brought with it a multitude of trauma for children. Next. And so a traumatic event is defined as something that's very frightening, something that is dangerous or violent, or poses a threat to an individual's life, whether or not that threat is real or imagined. It doesn't matter, because I'm pretty sure if any of you have been in those close situations where you've been driving down the highway and someone looked as though they were going to not stop at a stop sign or not stop at a red light, and you're startled and you're perceiving in yourself at that moment, they're going to hit me. That brings about a traumatic response. Or it can happen by being a witness to something, having somebody tell you about something that's going on in somebody's own situation can bring about it. So all of these different things that have happened have changed the world for children, to such a point that in October, the major American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatrists, Children Hospital Associations, all sent out a cry in October, letting us know that they have declared a national emergency in children's mental health and serious toll due to COVID. So our children are in severe danger based upon things that have happened. Their mental health is at stake. And so that's why I'm so glad that you're participating in this session, to be able to see what we can do to help our children. Next. So remember I said a little bit earlier that children weren't little adults, but that they respond to things differently. They respond to grief differently. So someone can pass away, and with us, it's a sudden sadness. There may be tears, and a child can be told, and they may understand it. They can perceive it. They can walk out. Everything seems like it's okay. 6 months later, they start having nightmares. They start behavioral changes. And most people don't associate it that it happened with the death that happened 6 months ago. So sometimes it can be instantaneous with kids. Sometimes it happens later on down the line. But they respond to it by being anxious and worrying. Sometimes it can be, especially in these chaotic situations that we're dealing with now, what we find happening is social anxiety. You know, kids were traumatized by being at home and being separated by their friends. And then they went back to school and everybody thought things are going to be just fine. But it was the direct opposite of that. The anxiety built up, the worry built up, because some of them, listening to the news and things that were going on, do we Do we get immunized or don't we get immunized? Do we wear a mask or don't we wear a mask? And some of them were dealing with family members who had compromised immune systems. And they were going into schools and wondering, am I going to get sick and then come back home? Am I going to be the cause? So of my parents getting sick or someone close to me being sick. And so that brought about a worry and a anxiety. Some of them became depressed and sad during COVID because they were separated from their friends and isolated. And so we had the behavior changes where they weren't eating, they weren't sleeping, they were staying more so in their rooms and not coming out. They had difficult times self-regulating their emotions, the temper tantrums, breaking out, crying for no reasons whatsoever. There was the regression going back to earlier stages. Some have been sleeping in their rooms, and then all of a sudden they're afraid to sleep in their room, and they're coming in mom and dad's room and looking for comfort. There was an inability to focus and to pay attention the way that they needed to. The nightmares, changing in their sleeping and eating habits, and even complaining about stomach aches and headaches and backaches. These are all ways that children respond to traumatic stress and things that are going on in their life. So these are things to pay attention to. If you're seeing these changes, sit up and pay attention. Next. So we saw the things to kind of look out for. So now, what are some things that may be warning signs that I may now need to reach out, and I may need to get my child some help? And so if your child is worrying a lot, and if they're feeling very anxious and they're sad and they're tearful, if they're becoming very clingy, if you go to leave the house, all of a sudden they don't want you to leave the house, or they are wanting to go with you because now they're afraid that something may happen to you. This is extremely in those situations where they've lost somebody. So I've lost somebody. I hear all around me, other people are dying. So am I going to lose my mom and my dad? Is something going to happen to me? So there's frequent crying. There may be angry outbreaks, nightmares, avoiding people, things that they used to. They used to love being with friends. And now that COVID is somewhat lax and there's more interaction and social, but they don't want to go to their friends. Even after talking about it, they're still wanting to isolate. Some go back to bedwetting or forgetting how to talk and going back to the baby language, acting out scary events, very clean. Any type of the headaches or the stomach pains or diarrhea problems, not being able to hold food down, being lethargic, not having a lack of energy, or something similar to having a panic attack. Their heart is racing, their hands are shaky, they're jumpy. These are all things that say, I need to check with my pediatrician, and I need to have my child examined, and I need to make sure that everything is okay. And then they will be able to help direct me to the next steps. Next. So that takes us into post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of people are familiar with this more so for adults. And a lot of times, most of the time, is with our military forces who have served and who are coming back. But it's not just military situations. Post-traumatic stress disorder occurs anytime any person has experienced or witnessed something that was very traumatic, whether or not it's going through a tornado or a flood or a serious car accident where they were almost killed, or someone in the car that they were riding with was killed and they survived. Whether or not it's a rape or sexual abuse, or you've been threatened, sexual violence, or serious injury, all of these can cause post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder can last for months or years. And there are certain things that we call triggers or triggering events where, and that trigger could be a smell, it could be a sound, but whatever it is, the trigger takes the person back to the time that they experienced the trauma. So they're not necessarily dealing with the present, but they're dealing with the past and the traumatic event all over again. It's like reliving it. And so those triggers can bring back memories of the trauma, and it can bring intense emotional and physical reactions, from breaking out in cold sweats to literally feeling like they're right back in the situation again. Next. And so the DSM-5, which is the instrument that clinicians and psychiatrists use to make a formal mental health diagnosis, indicates that in order for someone to truly have a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, that the symptoms have to begin within 3 months of whatever that event occurred. And they have to last for longer than, the symptoms have to last longer than a month. And they have to be severe enough to interfere with your daily living. So it's the point of enough that I'm so anxious, I'm so worried, I'm so afraid, I can't go to work, I don't leave, I go outside. So I'm unable to hold a job down. I can't have the mental stability to be able to even sometimes care for myself. That's interfering with the daily life activities. There are re-experiencing. So there are flashbacks where they're in the midst of being able to see it. It's as if getting in the car. Some people, after having a really traumatic car accident, it takes time to get them back to the place where they're willing to be able to sit in a car without having the flashback of what was happening. And then they have the reoccurring nightmares or dreams where they wake up frightening, screaming. There are distressing thoughts. The thoughts are continually coming and invading the mind. And that's the other thing that prohibits being able to focus and concentrate, because I have these thoughts constantly coming through my mind. It's like the military example. I had a client who was military and ex-military, and on his way, driving on his way to campus one day, and somebody stepped off the curb in front of his car, off the curb walking, and it took him into a flashback immediately, and he started having a panic attack because it took him back to the time where you're in the war zone and people would literally walk out strapped with bombs in front of your car. So it was like reliving it all over again. And so the avoidance symptoms is you start avoiding places or events that remind you of what's happening. So with a car accident situation, if I had the car accident on a particular street, I may avoid that street or not go to it, or not go into that area again. People have difficulties, someone passing away and they pass away at home, being able to go to that house or being able to visit it. Avoiding thoughts or feelings that are related to the event. So death, losing someone traumatically, and then their birthday comes up, or the day that they passed away comes up. Those are always going to bring about thoughts and feelings that they sometimes want to avoid. Next. So are there some people who are at a greater risk than other people of developing post-traumatic stress disorder? Yes, there are. Individuals who have been exposed to dangerous traumas and events in the past are subject to be at a greater risk. So being able to have, as the third bullet says, that's a great example. Individuals who are brought up in as a child and raised in domestic violence situation or experience neglect and abandonment are going to be more prone to being able to be at risk for PTSD. Having ever seen someone get hurt or killed before puts you at a higher risk factor for developing PTSD. The lack of having support, anybody to support you when you've gone through a traumatic event, puts you at a greater risk. So every time for me, I'm always wondering about, and my heart always goes out all the way back to Katrina, those individuals who suffered through Katrina, and those who relocated to Texas. And shortly after, there was a hurricane that hit in Houston. So can you imagine how traumatizing it was to go through that whole situation over again and live it? And just recently, when the hurricane hit, about, what was it, like a few days in the same time frame as Katrina did in the past, hit again, to recognize how traumatizing that was for those individuals who have been in that situation. And it's like reliving it over again. Individuals who have had multiple losses, and then those who have a history of mental illness or substance use are also going to be at a greater risk for post-traumatic stress disorder. Next. So I hear what you're saying. I see the signs. What are some things that I can do as a parent? And what are some things that I need to be cautious not to do as a parent? The very first thing that as a parent or as a caregiver you need to do is be able to manage your own mental health. Somebody has become unmuted and your mic is, thank you. So we need to first be able to manage our own mental health. And I always want to put this in front of parents. And I want to, as a great example, remind them of, you remember when you get on an airplane and you're getting ready to take off and the flight attendants are talking to you about the safety equipment on the plane. And you remember when it gets to the portion about the mask, they always remind you, those traveling with small children, please make sure that you put your mask on before you put the mask on, attempt to put the mask on your child. You've got to take care of yourself before you can take care of your child. So manage and make sure you have dealt with your anxiety, your stress, your depression, whatever may be going on with you. Remind your children at all times that they are loved and that they are important. That the things that are going on around them is not their fault. Because the most powerless time in a child's life is childhood. Everybody makes all the decisions and they're powerless and they don't control anything. And so, but they take it for granted sometimes, and they take on those feelings. For instance, if things are going on, they're at home. We look at the time during COVID and teaching and trying to teach things, and mom being stressed out or dad being stressed out, trying to help them with their homework and help them, and then monitor and get back on a meeting, and they sense the frustration. They then begin to take it on that it's my fault that mom is upset. It's my fault that dad is upset. And they have to be reassured that it's not their fault. Allow them to be able to feel their emotions. And that's very difficult because that's one of the things that we don't learn how to do in life. As adults, there's so many of us who don't know how to feel. We don't know how to deal with our emotions because we're taught how to stuff our emotions, not how to feel or deal with them. And so because we're not taught how to deal with them, we don't teach our children how to deal with it. That it's okay that you're okay. So some are not okay. So sometimes when they're crying and they can't calm down, and you just grab them and hug them and comfort them until they're able to calm themselves down. And you're stroking their head and stroking their back and telling them that everything is going to be okay. That you can tell, man, something really has you upset. I can tell. But mom, dad is here for you. I love you. I'm here to listen to you. Limit the access that they have to media for events when something in addition is happening. Try to limit how much they take in. Do check-ins with them. How are you? What's going on today? Especially now that kids are back in school. Because as I said a little earlier, we were all under the impression that once they got back to school, things were going to get better. But things didn't get better. And the reason why is because in the midst of everything, we didn't count the cost. We didn't count the cost and be prepared that for the past 2 years, kids taught themselves because they had limited access to teachers and to be able to ask information. Their work was placed on a bulletin board. Sometimes they could get help. Parents sometimes didn't know how to help or deal with it. So they were basically on their own. And so they come back into the classroom with an expectation that they're going to be on level when many of them are not on level. And that added an extra amount of pressure. And then homework came in like a bomb. It's like, I've got all of this work. And so we moved from being online and doing school 2 or 3 hours a day, being free to take breaks whenever we wanted to be able to relax, to be comfortable, to being moved back into structure. And you're there 5, 6 hours. Now you're having to take in and comprehend that without any breaks. And so that was a big heavy going back in. And some kids feeling lost. I can remember my granddaughter telling me when I was checking into her with her, and she's in 4th grade. And so it's like we were going in and doing math, and I was confused. And I was confused because they were asking about timetables and things, and I'm supposed to know how to work this out. And the teacher is telling me, you should have learned this already. She said, I didn't learn it. I didn't know. It wasn't something, I wasn't in classroom. I'm not here. And how do I get here? And so teachers are frustrated, children are frustrated. And so it's added a lot more pressure into school. And there are a lot more kids in school that are dealing with anxiety that have ever been dealt with before. So as parents, friends, neighbors, grandparents, uncles, provide lots of hugs, lots of love and hugs. And make sure that you're taking time to spend time together as a family, doing fun things together to kind of connect. And then remember that healing takes time. It's going to be time. Take time for us to get to a place, because I hear so many people say, I can't wait till things get back to normal. And the truth of the matter is normal will never be anymore. The normal that we knew will never be anymore. We are now going to have to adjust to a new normal. And so we've got to remember that that's going to take time. It's going to take time to heal the wounds that have been caused by the trauma. And some people aren't just dealing with one trauma, but multiple traumas. So those are things that we can and should do. But what are some things that we should be cautious to make sure we're not doing? Don't expect children to be brave and strong or tough. That's one of the things that has happened to change us into not being able to feel as an adult. Because, and especially I want to speak to women because that's a big thing. You're strong. We're strong. Women are strong. We have to be strong. When you lose somebody and someone dies, the very first thing it is you've got to be strong for everybody else. That's a lie. You don't have to be strong for anybody. You've lost somebody that was very near and dear to you, and you have the right to feel that. You have a right to sit with the hurt, to sit with the pain and cry, and not have anybody ask you to be brave or strong. So just like we have that right, don't expect our kids to be able to do that. Don't make them talk about the event if they're not ready to. All you do is say, anytime you want to talk about it, I'm here. If there's something that's troubling you, I'm here. I'm always here to talk to you when you get ready to do it. And maybe if you're not ready to talk about it right now, maybe you can draw a picture about it to take away some of the stress and the anxiety. Or maybe you can write a story about it that will help you to be able to get it out of the inside until you're ready to talk about it. Don't get angry with them when they're unable to control their emotions. Because then I want you to think back. Think about those of us that have or are married or been in relationships with someone and you got into a conflict with them and you got angry. How easy was it for you to move from, okay, you need to stop being angry now, and let's just sit here and just like pretend like nothing ever happened? That doesn't happen. We don't go from 100 down to 0 at the drop of a penny. And just like we can't control those emotions, kids have even less experience about doing that. And we have to be able to show them how to do it and how to manage them. Don't get upset at signs of regression when it seems like they're going back to a younger stage. That's where patience has to come in. Because sometimes that regression is about, when I was younger, I didn't feel like this. I felt safe. So some of it is reaching back for a time when they felt safer, when the world was a better place than it is right now, when it wasn't as frightening as it is right now. So try to bring that comfort and reassurance and understanding. Next. So who can help me? So these are the professionals. And sometimes people get confused as to who does what. Because sometimes I get calls from individuals who are saying, can you do some testing for my child? And I have to make them aware that, no, I'm the counselor and I provide the listening ear, the non-judgmental, safe environment for you to come in and talk about anything that's bothering you. I can provide you with psychoeducation, skills training and social skills. Those are all things that the counselor provides, and the support and coping, helping to develop coping skills. A psychologist provides specific testing, and some of them may or may not provide counseling. The psychiatrist is the only doctor in the bunch. They can do testing, they do diagnosis, they prescribe medication, and some of them may or may not provide counseling. So some supportive services if you or a family member is dealing with social emotional disorder or mental illness. There's a lot of people don't know and don't utilize it. They may have seen it and don't recognize it, is their employee assistance program. Free counseling services. Sometimes it's 3 visits, sometimes it may be 6 visits, sometimes it may be 8 visits. But the thing about employee assistance program services is it's not like an insurance policy An insurance policy, you have to be insured or on the policy. With EAP programs, anybody who's living in your house can receive those services. They don't have to be a family member and they don't have to be on your insurance. So that's free counseling services. Take advantage of it. You have NAMI, the National Allowance of Mental Illness. They provide some great training for families and individuals who are dealing or supporting someone with a mental illness. You have Mental Health America. Mental Health America has a great tool, and it's a screening and assessment tool. You can go on, click on the link, and you can take a screening, and you can determine whether or not someone is dealing with depression, anxiety, PTSD, other behavioral situations. It's a great tool, and I use it for my clients. I can have my clients, I provide them a link, and I can have them go on, take the screening assessment. It gives you your score, take a screen print of it, and it provides you with recommendations. It tells you if you have a mild case or a serious case and you need to reach out to a mental health professional. Parents, Child Mind Institute is a great link and resource for any parent who is dealing with children and any of the things that I've talked about today. They have a great resource of information for you to go in and grasp. There's also the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. They have some great handouts for parents as well, as is the National Institute of Mental Health and the JED Foundation. These are great resources for you to be able to reach out and find assistance and answers. Next. And here are those resources and the links for you to reach out to them. Next is our questions. So now this is the time. Any of you have any questions that I might be able to answer for you? If you're not able to access the chat because you're in Zoom, is it okay, Sonia, that we let them unmute and to be able to ask their question? Is that okay?
Let me go to Hoover first. And I was reminded that in Hoover, there is a Q&A in the Hoover, but there were some questions that's already been asked. Again, okay. This was put in Hoover. This is to you. Thank you for explaining the difference between the counselor, the psychologist, and the psychiatrist. I hear therapists used too. Is that the same as a counselor?
Yes, therapists and counselors are one and the same.
The other one is, if you know you are at a greater risk, what do you suggest to lower the intensity of trauma stress responses?
Recognize that when you start feeling yourself being triggered, when you start seeing changes, when you're not able to sleep, when you feel like you're not yourself, reach out for help early. The earlier you reach out, I tell everybody needs to have a counselor that you go to and that you see and that you visit. I have a counselor. I have to, believe me, in this situation, sitting and dealing with it more than anything. We need a place that we can just go and we can just dump, and then we can get up and leave and go home. Everybody needs one. Take advantage of it.
That is so true. That is so true. I think, okay. There's a few comments also. Let me see. I'm just going to do a few comments and then we're going to ask for you to unmute that way. I'm just going to read a few comments. Rosie said, I used to work with recently arrived immigrant students and had a long struggle with an English teacher that would require students to write about their journey. Many students would refuse to do their assignment, and she would fail them for this. She felt they needed to work through their stories and had to explain to her that this was reopening wounds. What do
Yeah,
you think about that comment, Barbara?
that's very true. We have to be able to take that into consideration. You're sitting in a classroom and asking me to share my experience. My experience is not yours. And especially with immigrants, you don't recognize the fact of what that struggle and what that life looked like and what they have saw, what they have dealt with. And to be able to uncover that and not have a space to be able to do it, it is recreating the trauma for them. So I'm going to re-traumatize you for the sake of a grade in a classroom and then send you back out with no help. That's basically what you're saying. It's just like, okay, you go in and you have surgery, and I'm going to come in and your stitches are not quite ready to be taken out, but I'm going to take them out anyway. And you go back out, and if you get an infection, you get an infection. Same thing. And it's horrible.
Yeah.
And that's why even teachers have to be careful, even with little kids about it in school, and some of the things that they bring up and subjects and talk about that may be difficult. If for some reason a child says, I can't work or write about this, is there something else that I can do? Be flexible enough. The whole thing is the learning experience from it.
What's the screening assessment name again? You had mentioned a screening assessment. What is that name again?
It's for Mental Health America, and the link is it's a long one. In case somebody has a pen or paper, it's https:// screening.mha national altogether _org. And if you go there, it'll pop up and then it'll say screening tools. And you can see the screening and you just hit which one you want.
There was another question. There was a lot of comments also. One person said that I may want to grieve and deal with myself too. That's a huge one. That is a huge one. Jamie stated that my daughter has done that. She's reverted back to baby talk.
Yeah. And so be able to take her to your pediatrician and consult with a pediatrician and then determine whether or not seeing a counselor. And let me just let everybody know right now, it is very difficult to find a child and adolescent counselor and a child and adolescent psychiatrist right now. For the first time, and I've been counseling 18 years, for the very first time in my 18 years of private practice, I've had to start a wait list. Never had to do it in my life. But that's just the seriousness of what's going on with our children right now.
Now we're going to open the floor for any questions. We have about 10 minutes that would allow us to go through some questions. So if you can, if there's anyone who have questions, this would be the time to do so.
I'd just like to see if we can go back to the link, the slide that has the links on it. So people that may want to take a screenshot of that slide. There was one slide that had a bunch of links on it.
It was the one right before the questions. Resources, there you go.
Were you able to get that?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. There was a hand raised.
Hey, this is Shalonda. I'm trying to move my screenshot. I can't see y'all. I think that's it. Did I unmute? I think I did.
Yes.
My question is, you're right, it's hard to find therapists, and so thank you for mentioning that. What about child play therapy? That's an area that I get a lot of parents asking me for help here in the Austin area to find. Do you know about resources for child play or play therapy, if I'm saying
Yes.
it correctly?
So if you're trying to find one of the best ways there are two ways. Using Psychology Today helps a lot. If you go to Psychology Today, it has a listing of counselors and mental health professionals. And in your search, do play therapist. And it should bring up all those clinicians who specialize in play therapy. And so that's usually the younger children, because younger children haven't learned how to formulate and talk about their feelings and what they're experiencing. And so how they communicate is through play. And so that's the way therapy is provided, through the play and interaction.
Thank you. And my last question, because I want to share, my mama taught me to share, is how do you vet them? Do you usually try to go by word of mouth, or if they're on Psychology Today, is there like reviews? I guess I should go play with it.
Yeah, there are reviews. You know, you can Google. Google has reviews for therapists. You want to Google someone to be able to do it. Word of mouth is really good. Somebody who has gone and had one that they would like to recommend for you. But also recognize this when you're looking for a therapist, whether or not it's for you or whether or not it's for your child, is what works best for you. Just like every doctor for your PCP, if you're a person who loves bedside manner and you get somebody who comes in and they don't have time for you, they don't have time to answer your questions, you're going to change doctors because it's not a good fit. The same thing works with counseling. But what happens is we tend to give up on counseling. We go, that person wasn't a good fit for me, so I'm done with counseling. Don't be done with it. Find what's a fit for you. If you need someone that's of the same culture, look for that. If that's important to you. If you're faith-based and you're looking, and that's something that you want to rely on and you want to take into you with your counseling, do that. And be able to, on that reaching out to them and you're calling to make an appointment, have some questions that you want to ask about them to see if they're a good fit for you.
Shalonda, did you have a question? I saw your hand raised.
Oh, she already answered them. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Let me go to a comment maybe. They did say, Barbara, thank you for sharing some of the resources that you provided. And it's good that you provided the whole, and really, I mean, we really need a whole lot of resources about right now, you know, because families are really trying to find, you know, some type of support, especially during this time. Somebody had also mentioned that as the children were there being homeschooled, that they had to learn math all over again.
Yep.
I'm certain it was difficult.
Was.
I'm sure it was difficult. Let's see, any other questions here? Let's see, we went back. Are there any other questions? I don't see any questions here. Let me go back real quick. Another question. If you know you are at a greater risk, what do you suggest to lower the intensity of trauma stress responses?
Get into counseling to be able to deal with the past trauma. Because if you haven't dealt with the past trauma and you experience new trauma, it's compound because you're dealing with the same one. It's just like those of us who experience a loss. We experience a loss and we go through grief, but some of us won't allow ourselves to feel, so we don't deal with that. And then another loss happens and we're grieving that. And then it stacks up against each other and it prolongs the ability to be able to heal. It takes longer time to do it. So if we would just relinquish ourselves to loving ourselves enough to take care of ourselves fully, physically, emotionally. That's the thing that society has done for the longest time, is to divide our body into physical and mental. Anything that happened with the physical body was okay. Anything that happened with the mental is taboo. Same body. It's not. We've got to be able to get past that. And as we can see with the pressures, more and more people who are taking their lives, who are suffering in silence, we've got to be able to stop that. We've got to be able to stop that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being depressed. There's nothing wrong with being anxious. There's not. There's nothing wrong with that. And I should reach out for help for that the same way I would reach out for help if I had high blood pressure. And not to label an individual with their diagnosis. We don't do that with physical illnesses, but we tend to do it with mental illnesses. We tend to identify the person. You're bipolar. No, I'm not bipolar. I have bipolar disease, but I'm not bipolar. I'm Barbara. We don't say you're cancer. We don't say you're high blood pressure for physical, but we take away a person's identity and label them with their disease when it comes to mental health. And we've got to stop doing that. We've got to let people be comfortable enough to recognize there's nothing wrong with being sick and reaching out for help. Whether or not that sickness is physical or mental, it's still a sickness.
Right. Yes.
And we've got to teach our children that we don't want to lose any life by suicide, but our babies taking their lives, it's so tragic.
Right. There's been 2 suicides that I'm certain that everybody has heard about just recently within the last maybe 2 weeks or so. And, this is really a real issue. There was a question that it says, I think of compounded stress when you mention back-to-back stressors. Is that the same as toxic stress? Is compound used, or is there another term for it? They said, I'm sorry if I missed that in your presentation. So is that the same as toxic stress? Is compound use, or is this another term for it?
Compound stress is multiple stressors coming from different directions. So I have stress at my job. I have stress in my home. The teachers are calling me about my kids at school. So I have multiple stressors. That's compound. Toxic stress tends to be environmental. You're in a toxic situation that can whether or not it's a toxic relationship that's creating stressors within it. It's a toxic. It's something that's there that can be escaped with help.
The person who asked that? Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Hopefully that answered that. There was a reminder that NAMI offers a free online class called Basics that is self-paced. It educates parents about mental health resources and working with systems, and that's through NAMI. So thank you for providing that information. There's another question. I'm not sure if you answered this, Barbara, but is compound stress the same thing as complex post-traumatic stress disorder?
Compound stress is like I said, multiple stressors. It's not the same as complex PTSD, because remember, you may not remember in the slide I showed, there are certain criteria in order for it to be post-traumatic stress disorder. It has to have occurred within 3 months of an event happening. You have to have the nightmares, the flashbacks, all of that has to be occurring in order for it to be PTSD. Other than that, it's just trauma.
See if there's any other questions here. I think we answered a few, almost all of them, Barbara. Let me make sure. Let me make sure if there's anything here, because we want to make sure that we have everybody's questions. I think we've kind of gone through this presentation and people have asked some powerful questions because we want to make sure that everybody leave here with as much information, as possible. Because this has really been a dynamic presentation, Barbara, and we just want to make sure, that everybody leaves here with the information, because this is an issue that we're really dealing with. And one of the things that we also just want to say is that, overall, we really got to take care of ourselves. We really got to take care of ourselves. There was another one, it says, and it may be a comment, I'm not sure, but it says, I find the 4 hours as trauma-informed approach to be a single tool to guide that's very useful for me. Realize that trauma and how it affects people and groups. Recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma and respond with appropriate considerations of the effects of trauma and resist doing this with cause re-traumatization. So that's just, that's a comment. That's a comment there.
And that trauma-informed care relates back to Rosalie's comment about the teacher. That's not a trauma-informed classroom. That's not. A trauma-informed classroom would never allow that to happen. And then you add, you increase the trauma because you failed the student. Now she's experiencing even a greater trauma because now her grades are affected. Here I am trying to work through and do the thing that I need to do for myself. And instead of getting help, I'm being re-traumatized.
And then there's a few more comments here. There is a recording after the session. So for those who wanted to get a little bit more information about this presentation, please know that there is a recording. They did put the link in the chat, and so that's available for you all. And again, we really thank you, Barbara, for providing this information. The other comment here is, well, of course, we do want to thank you, Barbara, for this presentation, because I believe it's been very helpful for everyone. And I just want to continue just to say that we really need to take care of ourselves. One of the things that I just want to be transparent about is that during this COVID, I too have lost 2 family members during this particular time. But one of the things that I'm helpful and grateful for is that the social support, and then also my church as a support. But that's the part that I understand. I understand that there has been trauma on top of trauma, and I can see it within people that I'm around. So I thank you for sharing the information, but I also thank everybody for asking for all of the questions and things that you have asked. So we're coming towards the end of the presentation. Um, I just want to say that again, I thank you so much for being here. And then also, Barbara, I like to thank you for sharing your knowledge and the insight that you have provided us. And then also, I just want to thank everybody else for joining us. And